morning, everyone. Welcome to DupeBlocker training. My name is Kelly Jenkins, and I'll be walking you through the DupeBlocker app today. At a very high level, what the DupeBlocker app does, it is a duplicate prevention tool. So it attempts to block users from entering duplicates into your Salesforce database. It is compatible with all objects in Salesforce. However, when you install it, it does only ship with accounts, contacts, and leads. We'll go through how to enable other objects, but I just want to high level in the beginning let you know that it is compatible with all objects. Also, a few important things to understand. First, it only works with single inserts and single updates. So that's whether somebody's trying to insert a record through the Salesforce user interface or using some sort of API product where it's singularly updating or inserting records. It does not work with batch updates or inserts. And when I say it does not work, I mean it will not detect duplicates. The other thing to understand about DupeBlocker is we're going to walk through setting up a scenario. At that point, that scenario, once we deploy it, is active. Okay, so it does not retroactively go back and look for duplicates. That would be a demand tools exercise. Demand tools would be the product that would go look for existing duplicates. DupeBlocker is from the point of deployment going forward. Today we're going to look at DupeBlocker as it installs. I've made a few minor adjustments, and I'll highlight those when we come across them. Okay, but for the most part, we will be looking at it right out of the box. DupeBlocker installs with the tabs seen here. Okay, there's about 7 tabs, and I guess ignore this A test. My apologies. That's something I added that I forgot to remove before this call. So. Home through reports are the tabs that install with the tool. Okay, we're going to touch on most of them, or on all of them actually, but we're going to spend a majority of our time in the Scenarios tab and the Settings tab. I'm going to start off with a brief look at the DupeBlocker Today page. This is an administrative page. A few things to look at or note here. The first is your version number, so 3.90 or 3.9.11 is the most current version of DupeBlocker. If you don't have the most current version of DupeBlocker installed, you'll see an upgrade banner. And if you see that upgrade banner, please upgrade. We always recommend that you're running the latest version of DupeBlocker. It is also always free to upgrade, so when you see that, don't worry about price. It is always free. And we do not push updates. Also from the Today page, we have the self-help tile. Everything that I'm going to say today is out here for your reference, so if you like to refer to it in written form, you can do that here. The live training tile. This is actually a tile to all of the live training we offer, including DupeBlocker, but our other products as well. These classes are free to take, and you can take them as many times as you'd like and as often as you'd like. What I do like to highlight about the training calendar, though, is if you click into any class, you're going to get a class description, a really brief class description, but then there's a link to a previously recorded class. Okay, and the reason I like to highlight that is because we often hear, or we'll get emails following the class, something came up, it was an emergency, I couldn't stay for the whole thing, do you have a previously recorded class? So just know that if that happens, you can always come back to it here, or you know, if you can stay for this one and you're interested in, say, like demand tools reassign ownership tomorrow, but that time doesn't work for you, you can always access a previously recorded class. Okay. When you install DupeBlocker, the very first thing you want to do is visit the Settings tab. Okay, so I'm going to right-click and open this in a new tab. When we visit the Settings tab, it initiates the Scenarios tab. And I'll explain that a little bit further in a few minutes. But when we visit the settings tab, it, like I said, it initiates the scenarios tab. A few things to note while we're here. We'll hit on all of this as we work through, so we'll be bouncing around between scenarios and settings a lot. But while we're here right now, the administrator email, the person who installed DupeBlocker, their email is going to go there. This person is going to be notified via email when DupeBlocker experiences an error and needs attention. Some people don't want to receive the emails directly to their inbox, and they'll come in here and blank this out. And you don't ever want to do that because the email will still be sent. It'll just be sent to the person who initiated the error, and that's usually going to be like a user of some sort, and they're not going to know what it means. So the errors are kind of for administrator eyes. So if you don't want it coming directly to you, I would recommend putting in some sort of designated email address like admin@validity.com or something like that. Also, while we're here, disable DupeBlocker. This is not checked. So DupeBlocker is enabled when we install it. However, it is not affecting your users. It will not start affecting your users until you start building scenarios and deploying them. Okay? So why would you ever want to disable DupeBlocker? The main reason you would want to disable DupeBlocker, or the main use case that I've heard of, is I mentioned earlier that DupeBlocker does not detect duplicates for batch inserts and batch updates, and that's true. It will still, however, build keys for records that are inserted or updated in batch. We'll talk about keys a little bit later, but that key building process can slow down the update or insert. So some people prefer to disable DupeBlocker, run their mass update or mass insert, then come back to DupeBlocker, re-enable it, and build the keys. Okay, and that's for very large jobs. I mean, if I had to throw a number out there, in the millions, you'd probably notice a slowdown in your batch job. So, you know, if you're in like the hundreds of thousands range, I don't think it's necessarily a problem. Over here on this, as I mentioned earlier, we will hit on all of these as they become relevant. We're going to move on to this Enable Objects sub-tab, though. I also mentioned earlier that when we install DupeBlocker, we can create scenarios for accounts, contacts, and leads. And that includes lead to contact and lead to account scenarios, meaning somebody's inserting a lead and the contact already exists, or somebody's inserting a lead and the account already exists. As it installs, we can build scenarios to do that. But I also mentioned earlier that DupeBlocker is compatible with all objects in your Salesforce database. And I guess to be a little bit more precise, because whenever you say all, that gets a little dicey, right? All objects that support triggers, you can enable, and those are listed here. So if the object does not support triggers, it's not going to be listed here. Probably getting a little bit too deep into it, but nonetheless, if I wanted to create case scenarios, I can highlight case, choose enable, and I'm not actually going to do this because it's one of those things that takes about 10 minutes, and it emails me when it's done enabling the object, and it tells me that it completed. It has to run through its unit test to actually enable the object. Okay, down here, this is one of the few changes I've made to my org. I have enabled my classes, my opportunities, and my feed item. By the way, feed item's like a chatter object. So I can create scenarios to detect duplicate classes. And by the way, the classes is a custom object. You can identify your custom object by __C. Okay. Okay, so let's go build a scenario and test it. So I'm going to right-click and open the DupeBlocker Scenarios tab, and I'm going to put this in the view of all of my scenarios, okay? And what we're looking at here, these are the scenarios that ship with the tool, okay? If you don't see these, you didn't visit your settings tab first, okay? So all you would need to do is go visit the settings tab, let it initiate, and then come back to the scenarios tab, and these will populate. Now, you could drill into these, deploy them, and use them. However, I don't think a lot of people do that. I would argue that over 90% of our customers build their own scenarios because everybody defines a duplicate differently. So that's how I tend to go through this, is we're going to build a scenario from scratch. It forces us to go through it with a fine-tooth comb. And then once we're done with that, you'll be able to drill into these and understand what they're doing. Okay? So we're going to create a new DupeBlocker scenario. And our very first field wants a name because, you know, everything in Salesforce needs a name. So we'll call this, we'll do this on the contact object. We'll call this my contact scenario. Usually people will be a little bit more specific. You can put in here the fields that you're actually planning on matching on, but we haven't gotten to that part yet, so we're going to leave our name generic. The scenario type. From this drop down, this is where I'm going to pick which object I want to detect duplicates for. And I mentioned we're going to do this on the contact object, so I'm going to choose contact from this drop down. But notice the order of this list. If you enabled any non-standard object, which is anything outside of an account, contact, or lead, you will see those listed below. So you saw just a few minutes ago that I've enabled, excuse me, sorry, I've enabled my feed item, classes, and opportunities. So that's where you'll find those in this list. So we're going to circle back to the contact object. Just a quick note about the scenario type. This field is insertable or creatable, so it's available when I create the record. But if I need to change it in the future, I can't edit it. So let's say I build this scenario in its entirety, and then I slap my forehead and I go, oh no, I meant leads. I can't come in here and edit this field. I would have to delete it and create a new one and choose leads from this drop down. Match on insert action and match on update action. This is where we tell DupeBlocker what we want it to do when it detects a duplicate when somebody inserts a record that matches an existing record, versus what we want DupeBlocker to do when it matches a record that somebody updated to match another existing record. Okay? So we can have two different actions based upon somebody inserting a record or updating a record. And our options are, and we'll look at these, we'll build this scenario in its entirety, and we'll actually go look at all of these, but just at a high level for now. Our options are to do not insert. So when somebody inserts a record, they're actually stopped. They're going to get a screen with a red error, which is whatever I define here. Maybe you cannot enter this record. They'll see this error in red text. And their only options are going to be to cancel out or follow a link to the matched record. Our second option is to redirect to existing. So the user experience here is going to be when Kelly's entering a record that matches another existing record. When she hits the save button, her record will not be saved. She will be redirected to the existing matched record. The report duplicate option. The user experience here is that a user enters the record, and when they push the save button, their record is actually saved. Okay? And a warning will be created, which is another DupeBlocker object. A warning record will be created, and it allows somebody like an admin or even the user themselves to review before they actually commit to, say, merging the duplicate records, or deciding that they are intentional duplicates or misidentified for some reason and deleting that warning record. The do nothing option literally does nothing, so the user experience is they hit save and their record is saved, nobody's notified. We'll talk about its use case in a couple of minutes. Auto merge. The user experience here is that the user enters their record, and when they push the save button, their record's actually saved. And immediately following that save, that record that they just inserted will be merged into the record it matched to. Okay, so when we use this option, the incoming record is always the subordinate record, and the existing record is always the master record. These next two options, these are developer options. We're not really going to look at the user experience here because it could be anything, but just at a high level, we'll talk about it at a high level here. The redirect to a custom visual force page allows you to create your own custom visual force page, and when somebody inserts a duplicate, they are redirected to your page. And then the custom apex code option allows you to call in your own custom apex code. So in other words, you let DupeBlocker detect the duplicate, then you tell it what you want it to do when it finds a duplicate. Okay. Next, our match on update actions are exactly the same. We just don't have as many of them. You can choose do not update, which will actually stop the user. They'll see this error in red text. So maybe I want to change it to something like that. Gosh, my glasses, where are they? Okay. Error in red text. They can only cancel out or follow the link to the matched record. We can report the duplicate, which allows the user to enter the record, and then a warning would be created. The do nothing. This is the only use case I've actually seen do nothing in. When somebody wants to do something upon an insert but not an update, I have never seen the reverse. So meaning somebody wants to do nothing on an insert but something upon an update. And then the custom apex code option allows you to call in your own custom apex code when it detects a duplicate. Okay. If we can go back to this list, though, and if I could just kind of give some high-level best practices that I've seen over the years. As people get started, they tend to use the report duplicate option. It's the most benign of all of the options. It affects your users the least in your database the least. So because the record is inserted, then there's follow-up review. Okay. So when people get started, it's a good option because they're not really affecting too much. As you start to understand, okay, in this scenario, I'm never hitting false positives, right? Maybe I want to tighten up the insert action to an auto merge. An auto merge, I would say, is probably in the middle. Whereas these are the most restrictive, okay? So the do not insert and redirect to existing, when the user hits the save button, their record is not saved, and they really have no options, okay? So these are probably the most restrictive. And if you hear me use the term blocking action, I'm referring to either do not insert or redirect to existing. So a blocking action is a thing in DupeBlocker that is one of these two because the record is not saved. Okay. Moving down this column, deployed means that this scenario is deployed and it is actively looking for duplicates. So we're actually going to deploy this and we're going to build it in its entirety, then we're going to go test it. Bypass security is only relevant if you have private sharing in your org. So if you have private sharing, If you don't have private sharing, you can just disregard this. But if you do have private sharing, you may want to check the box. When it is unchecked, and let's say Kelly's entering a record, when it's unchecked, it will only compare that record to other records Kelly has access to. So if there's a matching record that she doesn't have access to, it will not detect the duplicate. But that's exactly what this box does, is it breaks down those barriers and allows DupeBlocker to match records inserted by Kelly to all of the records, whether she has access to them or not. What I like to be clear about is that the bypass security checkbox will never show somebody information they shouldn't see. So let's say I have this checked and I have my scenario here set to redirect, which would take somebody to the existing record. It will actually redirect that person to the record, but they'll get the insufficient privileges screen. Okay? So you want to be aware of what option you're choosing, because a lot of people probably don't want their users seeing that, right? They'd want to pick a different option. Enable dual filters. We're going to table that for when we talk about filtering. Person account scenario. So I'm building a contact scenario, and at this point it doesn't really know that because I haven't saved it. But if I were building an account scenario and I use accounts, I want to check the box here. Or I'm sorry, and I use person accounts, I want to check the box here. Also relevant on leads, because person account leads don't have a required company name. So if you work with person accounts, you do need separate scenarios for your person accounts versus your business accounts, and you would identify it by checking the box, because it does actually change something in the way that the underlying architecture is a little bit different. So you do need to do that. You cannot have a scenario that's going to detect person accounts and business accounts. And then our last field here, rebuild needed. This is checked because we need to rebuild our keys. The takeaway from this checkbox is don't ever manually uncheck it. You're an administrator, so we can't stop you from doing it. But you don't want to manually do it. I'll show you when we get to the key building discussion how you actually rebuild your keys. So let's save this, and we've just created our first scenario. Now we've got these related lists we have to fill out. Our DupeBlocker scenario rules is where we're going to tell DupeBlocker, or we're going to define for DupeBlocker what a duplicate is. So what fields do we need to require to match to be considered a duplicate? Our DupeBlocker scenario filters is where we tell DupeBlocker which records in Salesforce this scenario applies to. So leaving it blank would be all, but we could add in filter. So it only applies to users with a certain profile or without a certain profile, for example. But first we're going to do the scenario rules. So we're going to circle back up here, and we're going to create a scenario where we're going to require the first name, last name, email, and company name match. Okay, that's how I am going to define a duplicate. So we're going to start adding scenario rules. We're going to start with the contact match field is where I'm going to pick the field to match. So our first one is going to be first name. Mapping types allow us to match fields without doing exact matching. Exact is the default, but this is a drop-down. We've got many. We'll talk about a lot of these, the most important anyway. And starting with the first name mapping type. So this mapping type matches nicknames. So somebody's inserting a record where the first name equals Mike, but Michael is what the value that exists on the matching record, or Steve to Stephen, Pam to Pamela. It references a list in the settings tab. So I'm going to bounce over here to the settings tab and highlight the first name mappings. And this list ships with the tool. Okay. Over 800 values or nicknames come in this list. So Abby to Abigail or Abe to Abraham. And it doesn't really matter, or it doesn't matter, if Abby is being inserted and Abigail exists or vice versa. So it works both directions. If you find a value that is missed on this list, you can add your own entries. Okay. I have never thought of anything to add to it, and I've worked here 8 years, I've never heard of anybody, but you know, it could be happening, they just don't report back to me that they found some stuff that were missing, that, yeah, some nicknames that are missing from this list. Okay. So our mapping type references that list for first name, and then we have these matching algorithms on the right that we can add as well. So English fuzzy is a phonetic match, and these little help icons will help remind you of what these things do. It's a phonetic match. It ignores the vowels and analyzes the sounds of the remaining consonants. So it's great for finding spelling errors. Alpha Clean only analyzes the English alphabet A through Z and numbers 0 through 9. It ignores foreign characters and punctuation. Okay. I don't necessarily think it's great for the first name. We'll talk about it in the next field, but transpose does not care about word order in a field, just that all words exist in a field. And then finally, match blank allows blank values to be seen as matches. And this is confusing, okay? So what people think match blank means, and I agree with them, that can be a little confusing, is that let's say I'm inserting a record where the first name is missing, but its matching record has a first name. Match blank will not detect that. Match blank only matches where the incoming record and the existing record are missing the value for that specific field. I don't know that first name's the best example of that, but both records must be missing the value from the field. Okay, I'm not going to turn it on. Okay, first name. Now we need to add last name, because I said that's the next field in our matching criteria. And last name, we don't have a last name specific mapping type, so I leave it exact. But the last name field is one of the few examples where I think all of these matching engines work really well. So fuzzy to find spelling errors, alpha clean to ignore punctuation. So you know, in hyphenated last names, some people actually type a hyphen, some people put a space, some people put space, hyphen, space. So ignoring punctuation will help detect that. Transpose also is good on the last name, because hyphenated last names, again, sometimes they get flip-flopped. Now, match blank is moot on the last name field because it's a required field, so it's never going to be blank, so it doesn't really matter. So we'll leave that and save it. Next, we're going to add email address. Okay, leave it exact. And this isn't a required field. So maybe I do want to turn on match blank. So if somebody inserts a record and the email is missing, it would match to another record where the email is missing and the first name and last name, and now we're going to add company name match. Okay, so let's add in the company name. This list is ordered by contact fields alphabetically first, and then when I scroll down, we're going to see the account field. So the account name is actually on the account, so we want the account.name. And when we match account names, the go-to mapping type is what we call the cleaned account name mapping type. And if we have any Demand Tools users on the phone, probably very familiar with this. It references a list over here in the settings tab. So I'm going to go back over here, and we've got our cleaned account name settings. Within that, we have 3 sub-tabs. So we have replacements, which will find the values on the left and replace it with the values on the right. So for example, if somebody's inserting a contact on an account Ohio State University, and the same contact exists on an account that says Ohio State Unis, it will detect the match because I've got that value here. This list ships from DupeUp. These values below I've added. So I've done some testing. We can ignore these three, but hospital to HOSP, university to UNIS, manufacturing to MFG, and so on. If you want to add your own values, you can create a new entry. And existing value and new value might be a little bit confusing. The existing value means the long form, and the new value would be the short form. Okay? And where you can remind yourself of that is this tool ships with Saint and ST. So use that as your guide to know which is the one that's existing, meaning long, and new value, meaning short. The prefix removal will ignore these words at the beginning of the account name. So it would match the Validity company to Validity company. Okay, by ignoring the. I have not added anything to this list. It ships as is. And then the suffix removal ignores these at the end of the field. So somebody's inserting IBM Co., but IBM Company or IBM Inc. or IBM anything down this list exists. It will ignore these suffixes. This list ships from PLC up. These values below I've added. Okay, so again, you can create your own entries. And the more you add to your clean account list, the more robust your matching becomes, right? So it's really great. It builds over time because you don't always know what you don't know about what you need to put in here until you start seeing stuff. But over time, I mean, I've seen clean account lists that have built over years, and that they're really sophisticated matching. So it's a pretty cool mapping type. Okay, so let's save this. And now, when somebody inserts a record where the first name matches, last name matches, email matches, and account name matches, per my mapping types and matching algorithms, and it detects a duplicate, DupeBlocker is going to circle back up here, because it's an insert, and it's going to report the duplicate. Likewise, if somebody's updating a record that makes it match another record where the first name, last name, email, and account name matches, it's going to report the duplicate because these are both selected for report duplicate. Okay. When we match on these four fields, all four fields must match. They are ANDed together, so first name and last name and email and account name must match. We cannot OR here. If you need to OR, you have to create another scenario. So let's say we want the account name, first name, last name, email, or phone. I would need to create a secondary scenario where I match the account name, first name, last name, phone, and not email. Okay. Order doesn't matter here since they're ANDed. Sometimes I'm asked that, does it matter what order I list my fields in? No. Now our next related list, the scenario filters, is where we tell it which records in Salesforce this scenario applies to. And this filtering discussion gets a little complicated because in addition to having one filter, we can also enable dual filters. And before I move on, I think I saw a question come in. Please demo the OR option. There is no OR option. You'd need a secondary scenario, or a second scenario, I guess I should say. Because we can only AND within this. Okay. DupeBlocker scenario filters, as I mentioned, where we tell DupeBlocker which records in Salesforce this scenario applies to. When it is blank, it is going to apply this scenario to all contact records in Salesforce. So all incoming and all updating. But if I want to segment the data, this is where I'm going to do that. And when we have a single scenario, we have two options within that single scenario. We can have an object-based filtered object-based filter or a user-based filter, and they behave very differently. So let's start with this current user or this user-based object filter. We can choose to have this scenario apply to a specific user, a specific profile, or a specific role. So let's say, for example, we know Kelly never looks for duplicate contacts, so we're going to make this contact scenario only apply to the records she inserts or updates. Or since I'm testing, I'm rolling it out right now, I'm testing it, I only want it to apply to the profile of system administrator because that's my profile. Okay, so that way it's not affecting my users. When we use a user-based filter, let me just add one here. You don't actually need the ID, by the way. You can search for the person, and it'll give you a list here, and you can do it this way. So when we have a user-based filter, all records updated or inserted by Kelly will be compared to all other records in the database. Okay? So only the incoming or updated record needs to fit the filter criteria. Object-based filters don't work that way. When we use object-based filters, like I only want this scenario to apply to records where, let's get one in here, contact records where the state, we'll take a state one here, the mailing state equals Arizona, okay? It will take all incoming and updated records where the state equals Arizona and compare them only to records where the state equals Arizona. So when we use object-based filters, both the records must fit the filter criteria. When we use user-based filters, only the incoming or updated record needs to fit the filter criteria. Okay, so that's something really important to understand if you're going to use filters. Now, what if I want all my incoming or updated records in Arizona or where the state equals Arizona to be compared to all other records, not just other records in Arizona? That's exactly why we introduced this dual filter concept. Okay, because that's a big limitation to only be able to compare to have both records fit the filter criteria. So I'm going to go turn on the dual filters. Okay, and now I've got this related list. Okay, this wasn't here before, the target filter. So when we turn on the dual filters, this filter repurposes as the source filter, so it applies to the record being inserted or updated. And then the target filter applies to the record that is already existing in Salesforce. So if I go back to that scenario that I mentioned before and I said, okay, I want all the incoming or updated records where the state equals Arizona and compare them to all other records, I'm going to leave this filter blank. There's no way to say all other records. It just does that by default when we leave it blank. You could, however, have a very specific target filter. So maybe I want to take all the incoming or updated records where the state equals Arizona and compare them to records owned by Kelly. Okay, I could add in the owner equals Kelly. Okay, so you can have a very specific source filter too if you want one. I don't see this a lot. In fact, I don't know that I've ever seen it. I think for the most part, most people only use it in the use case where I want to take records with criteria X on the contact and compare it to all other records. But you could do it if you do have the use case. Okay, so let's go test this now. I'm going to turn that off because I'm the only user in here, so it's not going to matter. Let's go test this. But before we do that, we need to build the keys. Okay, so DupeBlocker builds keys for all of our records in Salesforce, or all of the records that for this scenario. Okay, and where two records have the same key is, well, it tells DupeBlocker it found a duplicate. So where it matches on these fields with the mapping types applied and matching algorithms applied, based on that, it builds a key, and we'll look at one actually in a few minutes. And where two records have the same key is where DupeBlocker circles back up here, and if it was an insert, it will report the duplicate, and if it was an update, it will report the duplicate. But we need to build those keys. Here is where you actually build those keys. Before we do that, we need to have a key building discussion in the Settings tab. In the General Settings, the default key builder is the original. Okay, this one runs faster, but is less stable. And when I say it's less stable, what I mean is that you're more likely to hit timeouts. Okay, your other option is to use the batch apex. And this one runs a bit slower, 50% to be precise. But the thing about it is you're less likely to hit timeouts. The other thing about it is you can kick off the key rebuild, close the tab, and it's going to email you when it's done. So I always recommend the batch apex. It's just, I don't know. I don't like to sit there and wait for things to run. I'm going to use the original to build the keys so you can see exactly what I'm talking about. And I'm in a dev org, so this is going to go really quickly, but hopefully it won't go so fast you don't see it. We're going to rebuild the keys here for this scenario. If I wanted to rebuild all keys for all my deployed scenarios, there's a button to do that too. This is my only deployed scenario, so it's not going to matter which one I choose. So you're going to see here in red text, do not leave this page until the key building has completed or the process will be interrupted. The batch apex won't do that. Okay, and that's cool because you can just shut it down and move on about your day, and it'll email you when it's done. The other benefit that I want to highlight about the batch apex is it doesn't use API calls. Our original key builder does. So if you're concerned at all about your API usage, you're definitely going to want to use the batch apex. I use the original. It is faster, but again, I am cheating. I am in a dev org. I only have about 100 records in here. So, and we can see the rebuild needed checkbox unchecked for me. And it does update the date that I built the keys. Okay, now we can go test it. So I'm going to go to my Sales tab. We're going to create a contact. Okay, this is our first contact. Nothing's going to happen here. I'm just going to save it. And then we're going to clone it, which simulates an insertion. Okay, and actually, what do we do? And we're reporting the duplicate. Okay, so we're going to report the duplicate in our first example. When we report duplicate, we can have a task created. The default is no, don't do that. But we're going to go do that so that we can see it. You don't have to use this functionality, but I'm going to show you anyway. So if we create a task, we can have that task assigned to the current user, who is the person who created the duplicate, the scenario owner, or both people. Now, I'm going to be the same person, so we'll just choose the scenario owner here because I'm going to be creating it and I'm the owner of the scenario. Okay. So let's clone this. And let's go ahead and give in the cloned record so we can see. Save. So there's the user experience for report duplicate. Pretty benign, right? My record saved. Here it is. Now, it did create a warning record, and these warning records are available in various places. One of those places being is a related list on the record itself. So I set this up as just like any other related list. You go into the page layout, you drag it down, and it's here. So that's one place that we can access that. It looks like my pop-up for my, there's my task that I got. I created a task letting me know that somebody created a duplicate. Okay, so that's going to be another place that you can access the warning. We can drill into the task itself, and it gives me a link to the warning. So there's two places, a related list or from the task. This is what a warning looks like, though. Okay, we're actually on the warning record now. And we can see down here, it's showing me the two records it's identified as duplicates, allowing me to review. Okay, yes, this is a duplicate. No, it's not a duplicate. I can drill into the records here and review them closer. Okay. From this point, though, I can choose to merge them. Yeah, like, yeah, they are in fact duplicates. Let me merge them. Or if I say, oh, you know what, these are deliberate duplicates, let me just delete this warning record. I could do that as well. We're going to merge this, but before I do that, I do want to highlight this is the key. So this is what a key looks like. It is a concatenation of the fields that I matched on with the mapping types applied and the matching algorithms applied. Okay, and like I mentioned earlier, where two records have this exact same key, tells DupeBlocker it found a duplicate. The 425 is just an auto number, so when you create scenarios, they're auto numbered. So this scenario, my contact scenario, has an auto number of 425. Okay, this is not on the page layout by default, but you could add it if you're curious about the keys. You just go into the DupeBlocker duplicate warning object, the same way you'd access any object, and add it to the page layout. Okay, let's go ahead and merge this though. Actually, before I do that, I want to show you something. Let me clone this Josh record a few more times so that we have many duplicates. So let's save it, let's clone it and save it a couple times, because what I want to show you is, okay, it's showing me all these down here. Let's access the warning here. Now I've got 4 records, and I say, okay, yes, these are duplicates. When I merge and convert the duplicates, or merge in this case, it's a lot like the Salesforce merge, except you're not limited to that 3 at a time thing, right? And our tool, DupeBlocker, does use the Salesforce merge call. So we have their code built into the tool, so the merges will behave exactly through DupeBlocker as they do through Salesforce. But I get to choose which values survive from each record. Now I did clone, so these are exactly the same, but I can use the radio buttons to pick records, or the values from each record. And if I want to not merge one of these, I can deselect it at the top. So I can say, okay, well, this one, I don't want to merge into these 3. So let's go ahead and merge these. We'll be left with 2, but nonetheless, So there's still that one remaining. So it does kind of clean up after itself, which is nice. Okay. Actually, I just wanted to show you how you didn't have to merge all of them. I'm going to come back here and I am going to merge all of them because we're going to move on to our next action, which we're going to look at the blocking actions. So when somebody inserts a duplicate, we're not going to let them save the record. Okay, so let's close down some of these things. So we're getting to the part here where I end up with all these open tabs, and okay, here's our original. Here's our scenario. So let's change our action now. Okay, let's look at a blocking action. Let's start with do not insert. So our user is going to see this error in red text. We go clone Josh, and we'll give him a department. Or no, we'll give him a lead source is what we'll do. Now here's the user experience when we choose do not insert. Let's save it. My record's not being saved, right? So my only option here is to cancel or follow this. We'll do a right click to the matched record. Okay, so this is kind of a really restrictive option here, because if I just spent 30 minutes filling out this contact record, I might be a little ticked that I can't save it, right? Shoot, even 10 minutes. So, you know, when you use these blocking actions, it really depends on how finicky your users are. I know when I was an admin, I don't think I would have ever really been able to block our sales team from entering records. But the functionality is there. Every organization is different. So when we choose this do not insert, though, we do have an option that we can stop them, let them think about it, and say, you know what, I want to insert it anyway. And that is called block bypassing. And so let's go back to the scenario and put it in edit mode. When we have the do not insert selected, there's this allow block bypassing, and when I check this box, now I can stop my users, make them think about it. Let's cancel out of this, and then they can insert their record anyway. So let's clone again, and we'll put the department in here. And now when we push save, same user experience. I get my error and I get my link, but now there's this gray box saying, okay, I saw it, but I want to insert anyway. Let's go ahead and bypass the block and insert the record anyway. And when I did that, it creates a warning. We looked at warnings with the report duplicate, but warnings are automatically created when people bypass blocks. So now we can come down here and we can see we have a new warning. Okay, and we can merge from this screen or decide that these aren't in fact duplicates. And which, by the way, if we're looking at this and we choose not to merge it, I always recommend deleting the warning record. And the reason is because, well, A, you're paying for the space, right? So if you've got hundreds of thousands of warning records that nobody's doing anything with, I mean, you're paying for that space. But also, when you have a lot of warnings with a bunch of potential duplicates, which these are the potential duplicates, by the way, the actual contact records, when you get into the hundreds of thousands, DupeBlocker is unable to run through all of its code, and it does start to throw more errors. So to keep it clean and avoid errors, I tend to recommend, you know what, if you see it and you don't want it, just hit the delete button. I wouldn't leave it sitting out there. Now, like I said, by default, it will create that warning record when somebody bypasses a block. Some people don't want that warning record created. So when their users bypass the block, they don't want it. And you can actually turn that off in the settings tab. So let's bounce over there. And it's this checkbox here. It's checked by default, but if you come in here and deselect this box, when your users bypass, you won't get a warning record. Okay. Okay, great. So let's go look at the next one. That's going to be redirect. This one actually goes really quick because we can't, there's not a whole lot of customization we can do here. So if we go to this Josh record and we clone it again, let's give a birth date of September 19th. And when we save the record, this is going to be the user experience for redirect. When I hit save, oh, okay. There was a slight system delay there. It caught me off guard. But when I hit save, it's redirecting me. Now, in my case, I have two Josh Stubers out there, right? Because I just created one in the last scenario, and it created the warning record because I bypassed the block. So I'm being given a list here of the existing ones. But my record was not saved. I can only follow one of these links. So even within the blocking actions, the do not insert action at least gives them a stop, right? Okay, let me write down at least everything that I did here. Whereas this one, there is no stop, right? It just takes you straight to the list of matched records, or if there's only one, it'll take you to the record. And if we want to see that, let's clone, or let's merge our Joshes here. And clone again. So when only one exists, here's what happens. It just took me, it happened so fast you didn't even see it. But it just took me straight to the record. And we can see that because no birth date it was saved. Okay. All right, let's go look at our last option, which is going to be auto merge. I'm going to probably admit that this is my favorite action. This merges the record following the save. So let's get over here. How many Joshes do we have? We only have one, so let's clone. And let's give this Josh, our cloned Josh, a favorite color, okay? And we're also going to give this Josh a lead source of other. And when I push save, my record was saved, right? Here it is. It's got a lead source of other, favorite color of green. But if I hit refresh on the screen, the record was deleted because that merge happened after. Okay. So let's go look at our existing Josh, and we can see that our Josh that we just entered was merged into this existing one because it's got a lead source and it's got a favorite color. Okay, and when we choose auto merge, we actually get to set up which values from each field survive. I just used the defaults to initially show you what the auto merge does, but let's go drill into that. So when we choose auto merge, this gray button appears, our auto merge settings. Okay, and within here, we've got our merge target field. So here is where we're going to choose if the incoming record matches more than one record. So let's say I'm inserting Josh, but 3 Josh contact records exist. It's only going to merge that incoming one to one of those 3 existing Josh records. And that's another misconception about DupeBlocker, by the way. Some people think that, okay, this incoming record matches 3 records, it will merge all 4 records together. That's not the case. It's only going to merge that one coming in to one of the existing. And that's what you're going to choose here from this merge target. Okay, in the event that my incoming record matches more than one, which record do I want to merge to? The oldest, newest, or last updated? And those are your only three choices here. Okay, so default is oldest. Next, we have our default mergeable field action and our default non-mergeable field action. Before I talk about these, let me just define what a mergeable field is. A mergeable field is a field of there's three field types where we can merge data, and those are multi-select pick list, area text fields, and true-false fields. Fields of those three types are what we call mergeable fields. Fields of all other types are not mergeable. Okay, we can't keep the data from the both records that are merging together for our non-mergeable fields. Okay, so these drop-downs indicate what we want to do by default for our mergeable fields. And most people choose the default, which is merge the values, meaning so you don't lose any of that data. Okay, but you could choose, your other options are going to be to overwrite. So this option allows you to take what's on the incoming record and overwrite the existing record for those three field types. For fields of those three field types, we can update if blank, meaning update the existing record from the incoming record only if it's blank. If it's populated, leave it as is. Or ignore, meaning for fields of those three field types, just ignore the values that are on the incoming and keep what's on the existing. And like I said, I think most people choose merge values, that way you don't lose the data. We've got the exact same options for our non-mergeable field except for the merge option because we can't merge it, right? So we can say we want to overwrite everything for fields of every other field type from the incoming to the existing. We can choose update only if blank, or we can choose ignore. So let's say in my example, I always want to overwrite. I want to merge my mergeable fields, and then I figure that the incoming record has the newer data. I always want to overwrite the existing record with what's on the incoming record, except for the lead source. I always want to keep my original lead source. And that's what this section down here does. So this is our overrides. I can say, well, you know, for the lead source, there it is, I always want to ignore that. I always want to keep what's on the existing record. And when you do this, you got to remember to hit this add button. I always forget to add it, and I wonder why it's not working. So when you add it, it drops to the bottom in your override section. Jeez, I'm losing my voice. Okay. So if you forget to hit the add, or if you test and it's not doing it, come back and make sure you hit the add button. I know from hours of banging my head against the wall that people tend to forget that. So let's go ahead and save this. Oh, one more thing. This include in tasks. This is this section here. By default, it will create a task. What is contained in that task are the values from the incoming record for the populated fields, I should say. It's got some generic subjects. You can call this whatever you'd like. I like to make the due date none and the task status completed so that it goes into my history rather than in my open activities. And then also the task owner in this case can be the person who created the duplicate or the owner of the master record. Okay. Again, I'm going to be both. I'm the same person, so we'll go ahead and keep it current user. So if we go back to Josh, okay, we can see it in our open activities because the default is to create an open activity. And what's in here are the populated fields from the subordinate record. So if you ever needed to get back to that information, it's here in this tab. If you don't ever think you would need that information, I would recommend not creating the task because, whoops, where'd I go here? Again, it takes up space that you're paying for in your org. Okay, so let's go back to Josh. Let's clone again. And we're going to give it a different favorite color. We're going to give it a favorite color of blue. And we're going to give it a different, whoops, not green blue. Oh, green blue would work. And then we'll give it a lead source of purchase list. And the reason I'm doing this is because based on the settings that I set up, I'm going to expect that the favorite color will overwrite on the existing record, and the lead source will be retained on the existing record when I insert this one. So purchase list will not survive, but green blue will. So let's save it. And this is our cloned record. And again, if I hit refresh, it's been deleted. So let's go look at the Josh Stuber record. And we can see that the lead source did not update. It kept the original. And it did update the favorite color to green blue. Okay, so that's illustrating how you, field by field, you get to pick which values survive from the incoming record. Okay, now recently, I don't know if we have any demand tools users on the phone, but recently we've built in the ability in demand tools to merge duplicates detected by a DupeBlocker. Okay, so in the single table dedupe, you can pull in all your duplicates detected in your warnings and mass merge them. Through DupeBlocker itself, it is a one-by-one merge. You can't mass merge them here. Okay, you can detect duplicates here and then use demand tools to merge them. And most people who have DupeBlocker have demand tools as well, which is why I'm bringing this up. So, and further, sometimes the auto merge, people love it, but it doesn't quite give the flexibility that demand tools offers in the mass merge. So, for example, when I go to my DupeBlocker settings and I say, okay, I chose the oldest record. If it matches to more than one record in Salesforce, I chose the oldest. And we can see these are only 3 options, but we've had use cases where people say, okay, if it matches to more than one record, I want to merge to the one owned by an active user. I don't want any of these 3. And unfortunately, DupeBlocker does not have that functionality. We can see I can't do anything here but pick one of these 3, right? So if that's the case, you want to merge to the record owned by an active user. What you would want to do is you'd want to report the duplicate instead, then actually execute the merges through demand tools, because in demand tools you can load this scenario and you can say, okay, merge these records and keep the one with the active user as the master record. Or you don't even have to keep the master record. You go down to the field level and you can say keep, the active user. So our tools work really well in unison. If one doesn't complete every use case you have, you can always go to the other one. We've got a backup in some way, right? You can use the demand tools to actually build those rules to keep the active owner. Okay, so I got sidetracked because these 2 tools are more integrated now than they've ever been. Training has not reflected that as of yet, although that'll be changing. We might have a demand tool / DupeBlocker class in the future, but I did want to let everybody know that you can use demand tools to merge your DupeBlocker warnings. Now I'm going to go over to the settings tab and highlight some of the things we didn't get a chance to talk about. Export and import settings. So the use case for these two buttons is if you want to build your DupeBlocker in a sandbox and then port it over to a production instance, you can export those settings from the sandbox, then log into your production instance and import the settings. And what this does, it actually exports a JSON file, and then you go in and you just load it. It gives you kind of like a directory. So wherever you've saved it, you'd pick that and load the settings, so you don't have to rebuild it. Now, you could do that. My personal preference would be, though, and I think it's easier to do it this way, is when you build your scenarios, I kind of mentioned earlier that you could put a scenario filter on here, and you could say, this scenario only applies to users with a profile of system administrator. Then you can run all your tests, right? Make sure it's working as you expect, and then when you're ready to roll it out to your users, what I see people do is they come in here and they change the operator. This scenario applies to everybody except system administrators. Okay, I think that's a little bit easier to do than using these import and export buttons in the settings tab. But functionality is there if you do want to use it. Okay. These fields down here, insert action tracking field and update action tracking field. So these are used when you're trying to build code based upon the action that DupeBlocker took on your records. So you can create a field on the record and have it record whether it reported the duplicate, merged a record, or did nothing. And then you can call that field into your code. So here's a use case. People who use lead round robin. Okay. The assignment of a record will happen before a merge. So if I have a lead scenario set up to merge, a lead will come in, it will be assigned to user A, and then it's merged into the existing record. And then user A missed their spot in line. Okay. So you can create a field that will tell it, that will populate this record merged and filter those out of the round robin rules so that user A doesn't lose their place in line. Okay. Is this Lightning compatible? No, not yet. It will be by Dreamforce. Okay. Which I think is right around the corner, the 24th maybe. So it's coming soon. Moving down this column, we talked about some of our mapping types. These two we didn't talk about though. State mappings and country mapping. So if you do any state or country matching, there's mapping types called state matching and country matching that reference these lists. So the state ships with U.S. states and Canadian provinces. Let's look at just New York just to see here. So if anybody enters a state with one of these values, they will all be seen as NY. Okay. Or we probably could look at California. Any of these values will all be seen as CA. And I also mentioned Canadian provinces, so let's look at Ontario. These values will be seen as Ontario. However, you can add your own entries. So if you work with India states or Australian states, like you want to have NSW seen as New South Wales, you can add your own values here. Similarly, the country mapping type references this list. Okay, and let's filter this one down just to US. Okay, so if anybody enters a record and you're matching on the country and they put any of these values in the country field, they will all be seen as US. And again, you can add your own values. So if you have your users inserting them a different way and you want to block them, you can add your own entries. Now, what you don't want to do, and I've seen people do this, so just a cautionary tip here. What you don't want to do is something like this. Okay. So you see here, I just added US to be seen as USA, then next it goes USA to US. This puts it into a recursive loop where it just spins and spins and it breaks DupeBlocker. So what you want to do with these lists is when you use them, pick a code, and probably want to use the one that's already established there, and put all other options over here. You don't want to create that recursive loop where it just gets stuck. US to USA, USA to US, USA, and so on. You know what I mean? I'm going to talk about web lead sources at the very end. I'm going to move into the dashboards and reports. And actually, the reports are just the source reports for these dashboards. And we're making this a lot more robust in the next version of DupeBlocker, but it is what it is for right now. It looks like it hasn't been refreshed in a while, so let me refresh it. Okay. So we've got a few tiles on here. Like I said, we're rebuilding it so that it's going to be much more robust. But this is what we have right now. We have our DupeBlocker merge total. So it tells us how many records were merged within, these are week ranges. Okay. And this includes our auto merge and our merges through, no, these are just auto merges, I'm sorry. Just auto merges. How many? It's a count. This tile here tells you how many DupeBlocker warnings you have by user and scenario, and I don't have any right now because I deleted them all, but it's a real-time count. So I have 0 now. We're going to see 0 here. This is the tile that I think is the most useful, the scenario effectiveness tile. So this tells us how many records were blocked and merged by scenario. So this does include our auto merges and merges through warning. And we can see here, only this scenario that we've been working with today has any counts. But the reason I like this tile is because if you have a bunch of scenarios and you see that one is not being particularly effective, you may want to repurpose it. Okay? You actually have a limit of how many rules you can have per object. And that limit is 40. So you can have 40 account rules, you can have 40 contact rules, you can have 40 lead rules, you can have 40 rules on any custom object or non-standard object you've enabled as well. So if you're running low on rules and you see that one is not being effective, you can undeploy it and build something new, or just change it within the scenario itself, like delete the existing rules and add new ones. But let me show you real quick where you can keep track of those. If we go to the Settings tab, here's a count of how many rules we're using, and it is only for the deployed scenario. So you saw that I have a bunch of scenarios out there that are not deployed, so it's not counting the rules on those. But our one contact scenario has 4 deployed rules. This is the other one that, let me actually go create a warning so we can refresh this and we can see what this all looks like rather than talking in hypotheticals. Let me go create. Okay, and we are going to clone. I just want to get one out there so that I can show you what these things look like. I save it. Port the duplicate. Okay. Clone. Save. Why is it not reporting the duplicate? Let's see. First name, last name. Oh, because I have the filter here. I'm a system administrator, that's why. So let's delete this. And I'm going to reclone. There we go. All right, now we've got a warning out there. Now let's go look at our dashboards and refresh. We should see something come up here. At least we have one warning. Okay, now we've got something here. Here's our one warning that I just went out and created. This one right here, largest duplicate warnings, and this one you also want to keep your eye on, okay? So warning 407 has 4 potential duplicates. And what you want to keep your eye on here is, I mentioned earlier when we have warnings that are sitting out there and they have potential duplicates, DupeBlocker can, at some point, become unable to run all of its code. So a good place to keep your eye on that is here. And if you have a warning, and this happens with test data a lot, so maybe you have a scenario where you're only matching on email and everybody uses test@test.com as their test email address, you can have a warning out there with 50,000 potential duplicates, and DupeBlocker is going to break, right? So keeping your eye on that here, you can drill into the warning and delete it if you need to, but just be aware that when we start to see this record count get into the tens of thousands on a single warning, DupeBlocker does start to break. And you could do things like, you could delete it, but another thing that I typically suggest is go into the scenario itself and put in a filter that says email not equal to test@test.com, or whatever your test data may be. You want to filter that out of your scenario. Okay. Okay, I'm going to move into a lead discussion. I saved this for the very end because not everybody uses leads in their Salesforce organization. So if you don't use leads, you're more than welcome to drop off. Of course, you are always more than welcome to stay and listen as well if you'd like. It's a short discussion. I don't have a whole lot to add, but there's a few things that we need to talk about when we use leads and the web-to-lead functionality. Okay. So I'm going to go back to the DupeBlocker settings tab, and it was this tab right here, the web lead sources. Okay, and this part also gets really confusing. So let me, for the sake of clarity, let me just set up a real quick lead scenario. We'll just call it lead. We will, we're going to make it real simple. We're going to do not insert, and we are going to deploy it. And we're just going to make it real simple. We'll do an email match only. Save, done, build the keys. Okay. So when we have a lead scenario set to block, meaning we're choosing do not insert or redirect, and we use web to lead functionality, okay? When our web to lead inserts a duplicate record, we do not want DupeBlocker blocking it, okay? It's just never a good idea to block an integration. So what this piece in the settings does is it says if your web source equals one of these things, these are the values that ship with the tool, but you can add your own, we will not block the record. We will report the duplicate instead. Okay? And again, just to take it back a second, this is only if you have lead scenarios to block and you use web to lead functionality. If you don't have that combination of things, this is not relevant to you. Okay? So let's go simulate what I'm talking about. Let me go create leads. We're going to go to the Sales tab and lead. Phone inquiry. So here's our first one. Okay. And let me make sure I built my keys and everything, because you know how these live demos can go. Okay, so lead, keys are built, email only, do not insert. Okay, so me as a user, I'm going to clone this, and I'm going to hit save, and I'm blocked, right? Now, our web lead is going to probably have a different lead source. So if we clone this, and if that lead source has web, which is a value that is in this right here, now in this case, it's not going to block it. And I'm using my imaginations and pretending right now that I'm the web to lead integration that's going to insert a lead into my org with a lead source of web. So when we hit save, it's not blocked. Instead, it reported the duplicate, and there was a warning created. So you want to, if you use web to lead functionality, you want to come in here and you want to make sure whatever lead source comes in on your web to leads is listed here. And that way they won't be blocked. Okay. Now, as you can see, what I just showed you, I'm simulating, I'm pretending that I am a integration, and I chose web to get my lead in there to show you that it wasn't going to block it. If your users figure that out and you're blocking them, and we've actually seen cases like this, like their users are thwarting the system because they know if they choose web here, their lead isn't going to be blocked by when they hit save. So whatever your lead source is, you may want to use a page layout, or page layout, I think, no, a record type, so that those users don't have access to this, whatever that is, whatever your value is on your web to lead source. And that's really the only extra with the leads. And that completes the demo. I did have a question come in earlier where somebody wanted to see the OR option, and I'm just going to go through that real quick. I said you cannot AND within a scenario, and you can't. You need to OR. If you need to OR, you need another scenario. So here's what I mean. Let's go to the scenarios, and let's clone this my contact scenario. So let's go with the example. I want account name, first name, last name, email, or phone. What I need to do here is I need to clone this. I don't know, we'll give it a... Okay. And when we clone, related lists don't come over. I need to choose the account name, the first name, last name, And now I'm not going to choose email this time. I'm going to choose phone. Oh, phone is a tricky one. For some reason, it is called business phone in DupeBlocker. Okay. Um, and we have a mapping type that can help you match those. We'll choose the Relaxed North American Phone Match, which only analyzes the 7 primary digits. Okay. So that's how you get around the limitation of not ORing, is we have multiple scenarios. So let me open this one in a new tab. This one matches first name, or account name, first name, last name, phone, and this one matches first name, last name, email, and phone. And I'm sorry they're not in the same order. Probably be a little bit cleaner if I did put them in the same order, but order within here doesn't matter. Okay. So that's how you get around that limitation, is by having multiple scenarios. Okay. And if you have any questions, go ahead and start typing. I just have a few closing statements. If something comes in, I'll bounce back to it. From the DupeBlocker Today page, your tool is supported, so I like to highlight you can reach out to us from this tech support tile. It's a form. It logs a case in the queue. Okay, but we're pretty quick about getting back to you. So just fill this out with your questions, and we'll get back to you. I also want to show you, this is kind of new, and I think it's kind of nice. It's our new community. When I say it's new, it's probably about 6 weeks old. But if you go to validity.com, in the upper right corner, there's a My Validity, and this is our community. So we have lots of solutions. Actually, you have to log in to access them, so let me just do that. Okay. All of the documents, so all of those help docs that you can get through our tools are easily accessible here. So if you needed to get to those DupeBlocker help docs, you can access them here. We also have these discussion threads, I guess you'd call them, but we've put all our solutions out there, our articles out there, and you can review them. We've got collaboration from our users. If you want to collaborate with your peers here, you can do that as well. If you're getting an error, you can search. So here's a common error that people get. It's called unable to lock rows. And this would be an error that's emailed to you. We have a solution out here that details what that means. So you're more than welcome to reach out to us, but maybe you can find the information faster on your own by searching the error in the Validity community. Okay. And by the way, if you're curious, because this is a very common error, this happens during the key rebuild, and this particular error just means we were not able to access exclusive rights to the record to build the key, and usually trying again helps. So, but that's all out here. You don't need to memorize all that. You can just search these as you come across them. Okay. All right. Well, I haven't seen any questions come in, so I want to thank you for your time. Have a great afternoon, and I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day. Actually, it looks like I'm maybe giving you about 30 minutes back, but I do appreciate you taking the time to learn about DupeBlocker.